gotta start with this song every time. It just, it's so fitting for this story. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. All right, I'm gonna let the pictures go, the music go, while I go advertise for the stuff. I'll be with you guys shortly. Meantime, hang out, get comfortable, grab some food, grab a drink, whatever you like. Go get cozy. And as usual, let me know if the volume is obnoxious or needs to be changed. Posting stuff on Twitter really feels like just throwing a snowball into the Grand Canyon and hoping you hit something. Just casting it out into the void. Where else do I gotta talk about this? A couple Discord servers I gotta tell, I guess. I gotta make sure I have everything, you know? Got water, got something to snack on if I get a little hungry. I'm gonna sound like a broken record because I ask this every time, but how's the volume levels? Sounding okay? Hey, welcome, welcome. You still got some time. I'm probably not gonna start reading until closer to 7:15, so that people have a chance to show up, arrive, settle in, get comfortable. Alright. I mean, I think my advertising is all done, so should be able to come hang out. Don't worry, it's not your guys' internet connection. This song just kind of sounds a little garbled. I feel like I tried to play this one last time. There's a lot more songs on this playlist than just like the 5 that keep playing. There we go. That's a fun beat. This song is called Take My Heart and Burn It Down. Very dramatic. Alright, we're gonna let the art gallery go one more time. Give people a chance to make it comfy. It's kind of like a movie theater. Only it's the same trailer showing every 7 minutes. Eventually there will be more art to add to this. Hopefully. I've got about half of the expected pieces so far. Dream Day! It's Tuesday Tales with Todd. Let's see if I can do the Twitch thing. Isn't there... Oh, no, that's not the right thing. I almost just cleared chat. And I'm such a good streamer. Isn't there a way you can do polls? How on earth do I do a poll? Slash options here. Manage a goal. I swear that's a Twitch thing, but maybe that's like an extension or an add-on that you have to have. We got time, Google. Save me, Google, you're my only hope. Well, that didn't work. Do it from here. Maybe I'm not a fancy enough streamer to have mods yet. Or polls yet. No. Help. Twitch, help. Oh, yep, I was right. I'm not fancy enough for a poll. Alright, well, instead of doing it with a fun little clicky poll, we'll just verbally ask. Who's everyone's favorite character so far? We've met a good number of the cast. There's still more people to meet, but got a good head start. You got some good options already. Right. Ugh. Who's ready for more Alchemance? I'm hoping you guys are. I'm ready. But, you know, I've been ready for 4 years. Well, I suppose it might be polite to do a quick recap of what happened last time. We picked up with Leo the detective and his new associate, Naira, at the finishing up their investigation at the scene of the crime where Mr. Lortran Dupal was assassinated. They wound up going out to lunch afterwards at Benji's Diner. good food and good fun was had by all. Naira was a little nervous about eating with cops, and also about being the only Nulf in an establishment that seemed to be entirely sneppered. Through following one of the waitresses, we did catch a glimpse that the chef actually happens to be a Nulf as well. So she wasn't completely alone. Um, they had their food, they talked about the case a little bit, and when it was time to leave, Myra was going to wait for the bus, but Leo wanted to be a gentleman, make his mother proud, and offered to give her a ride back to the university. Unfortunately, along the way, because he's a bit of a cheapskate, his car broke down, and the magnetic repulsors gave out, and they had to do a little bit of roadside repairs. It wasn't his first plan. His first plan was to call a tow truck, but Naira didn't want to wait with him any longer than she had to, and offered to take a look and try to fix it herself. And that's exactly what she did. She got the Electrum battery repaired. It was a patch job, but it was enough to work. And got the car up and going again. Was able to go on her merry way. From there, we met up with Moira briefly. And were reminded of the fact that not only was it her birthday, but that her mother had forgotten. And she was left to spend her birthday alone. Almost. Her butler, Sergey, wanted to make sure that she didn't actually spend it alone, and brought her some cake and a present, and offered to spend some time with her. We got back from there to Naira, finished up her day at the university, and got on a bus, which was what led to this wonderful illustration. And we finally learned why the mother was scowling so much here. Because, you look at the picture and you go, wow, that seems kind of rude. Oh, I really hope it is using the correct microphone. Give me a second. Getty stereo. Let me see. Checking my settings. It would be nice to know if I'm sounding fuzzy right. I don't think my every once in a while my webcam microphone likes to try to take over, and it's a piece of garbage. It's very cheap, and it sounds cheap. So I have to make sure that my fancy Yeti microphone is the one that's actually working. It is currently set as my default. I wonder if there's a way. Oh gosh, I think I just broke it. Okay, hopefully that didn't, yeah, there we go. Okay. I stopped momentarily. Now I'm going to check OBS to make sure that we are still Yeti. Okay. Alright. I'm going to operate under the assumption that the microphone is okay for now. Hopefully, if you're having like internet issues or something, it'll clear up soon. But so she was on the bus, and this particular snippet kindly but not so kindly asked Naira to give up her seat so that her family could have the rope. Naira did, though she did feel a little bad about doing it. The kid was very enthralled by her and wanted to interact with her, but his mom wouldn't let him. So they waited until the mom got a little shut eye, and then they had a little bonding time. Naira noticed that he had a little stuffed bird, and she gave him one of the feathers from her hair, and he loved it. Absolutely loved it. They left, and the bus ride was a lot more quiet and peaceful after that. She got dropped off in her neighborhood. She walked home through, you know, one of the not nice parts of town. It's what she can afford on her salary. And when she arrived, she caught a whiff of something very familiar, personal. She rushed to the door, threw it open, found a letter on the ground. Inside the letter was a note and a clump of her husband's fur. So, since we left off on that, you guys ready? Ready to find out what happens next? Bit of water to get started. All right. Chapter 5. Next on the list. 1 week later. The Dolahan factory loomed large in Salatra's vision. Lit by more electrum lights than any other building in all of Cyphus, it stood as a monument to harnessing alchemy through technology. It was a testament to how technology robbed alchemy of its life and wonder. And somewhere inside that heavily guarded, well-lit structure was her next target. She'd been given a week to prepare, and she'd tried to make the most of it. Her alchemical pouch was so full, she worried the strap would tear free. Yet, it was the least of her weights to bear tonight. On this side of the fence, she was a citizen. Not one with all the same rights as the majority populace, but still a citizen. Crossing that fence would make her something else. A herald of revolution. A murderer. But that was Salatra's role. She was the lightning strike, hitting only the tallest problem in the field. It was hubris to pretend she could stay on this side of the fence. And how many lightning strikes before the forest went up in flames? But of course she had to assume that was the point. It was the only way these murders made sense. Her belt of pre-filled cartridges slid into position above her hips. More Necrom and Firearm than she wanted, but there would be too many guards inside, and Electrum shots alone probably would not be enough. Pulling her bismuth catalyst from its holster, she loaded it with a Firearm cartridge. Grabbing one of nearly a dozen prism canisters, she bit off the tip and inhaled. The rush of clarity and the warmth of connection to the elements in her pouch were a comfort, but even they were barely keeping the adrenaline and anxiety at bay. Squeezing the trigger, the catalyst shattered the Firearm crystal within the paper cartridge, and raw fire magic gathered at the barrel's end. Tapping into the prism in her system, Salatra focused the energy into a bright blue flame no longer than the tip of a finger. It cut through the chain link fence in front of her like butter. There was no rain tonight. The next storm day wasn't scheduled for another 3 days. She still wore the poncho over her climbing suit anyway. Tucking the hood over her ears helped her feel less visible, even if the electrum lights used here were a far brighter luminosity than the Firearm lighting used nearly everywhere else in the bulb. Made sense. Electrum battery production was Dolahan's claim to fame. The exterior of the building was brick, so she couldn't simply scale it as she had Lortran Tower. There was, however, a large metal drain pipe tucked into a corner of the factory that should offer a way up, unless she was too heavy for it to support. The letter with instructions hadn't exactly offered her many alternatives. Dashing across the open metal grounds felt like a rabbit darting through a clearing while dozens of deerhounds watched hungrily from the tree lines. In fact, she could see many of the deerhounds, snappered guards on their patrols of the grounds with bright lights and imposing rifles. Thankfully, none of them spotted her as she reached the factory's outer wall. Staying in a crouch, she crept over to the drain pipe. It was thicker around than her arm, and it moved as she touched it. Great. Popping a pair of Aurum cartridges in her mouth, just in case, she activated the electrum pack in her climbing suit and began her ascent. The magnets at her palms left dents in the drain pipe as she climbed, and it creaked like it was experiencing a windstorm. Salatra used anything she could find on the wall to brace her feet, trying not to put her entire weight on the drain pipe. Passing a bracket held in place by a single screw, Salatra continued her delicate climb. By the fourth floor, something shifted in the pipe, and her feet had to bunch up against the same wall to compensate. The swaying motion almost made her swallow one of the Aurum cartridges, and she had to gag as she regained her balance. Thankfully, the magnets in her palms held fast, and she was able to pull herself upright. Pushing off a windowsill, she continued her climb. In the moment that followed, the bracket above her ripped free. With a horrible metallic creak, the drainpipe peeled away from the wall. Feeling it sag beneath her weight, Salatra pulled against it and deactivated the magnets in her climbing suit, flinging herself at the wall. She caught a windowsill with her fingertips, and the collision with the bricks nearly knocked the wind out of her. She dangled there, allowing the prism in her system to push away the panic. Looking up, her destination was close. She was only 2 floors from the top. Her feet scrabbled against the wall, looking for anything to help take the burden off her aching fingers. A glance downward showed approaching lights. Of course they'd heard the racket. She'd probably woken every snepperd in the district. Finding the barest hint of a lip of a brick with her foot, she risked reaching for her pack. 2 more Aurum cartridges went into her mouth. She crunched them all as she felt her balance slipping. Aiming her mouth downward, she watched the ground zoom away as she latched onto the raw energy seeping through her cheeks and pushed. Her shoulder caught the edge of the roof, sending her in a spin as she crested the top of the factory. Gravity worked its own magic, and she landed seconds later on her side. Her wrist cried out in pain, sending jolts of fire down her whole arm as she slowly removed it from where her hip had pinned it to the roof. She rotated it with practiced care, but any movement at all was enough to make her breath catch. Spitting out what bits of paper remained in her mouth, Salatra used her good hand to load a Curum cartridge into her catalyst. She held the barrel to her wrist and pulled the trigger. Blowing all the rest of the prism in her system, she latched onto the life energy and willed it to repair her sprain. 2 minutes later, the glow of the magic finally faded, and she tested her wrist. It still hurt, but not to the point that she couldn't use it. Now, it just felt like she'd smacked it on the edge of a lab bench, rather than hyperflexing it under her full weight. It wasn't perfect, but she needed to save the rest of her prism and Curum for what was to come. In Lortran Tower, she'd been able to enter well above the heavily guarded floors and bypass most of the security. This was a much squatter building, and they now had an idea that height was no deterrent for her. Nearby shouting drew her attention back to where she'd come from. She saw the edges of an electrum beam scanning the way she'd come up. Well, they certainly knew she was here now. Wonderful. Time to keep moving. Salatra prowled atop the roof, heading for a nearby door designed for roof access. The door itself was locked. Re-upping her prism, Salatra loaded an Aquam cartridge into her catalyst before forming an ice pick to unlock the door. Inside, metal banisters lined a concrete stairwell that seemed to go all the way to the ground floor. Salatra descended 1 flight, entering the top floor. The letter had included a map of the factory, showing areas where she was most likely to find Dolahan, and more importantly, where she was most likely to have the opportunity to kill her. Passing office after office, Salatra increased her pace down the frustratingly well-lit hall. The wall to her right was almost entirely made of glass, allowing quite the view of the main factory floor. There were several hundred people down there working the night shift. Despite the protective gear they wore, she could tell the majority of workers were Nulfs. Security down there didn't seem as tight. A couple guards were stationed at each major entrance, but they stood in pairs and kept each other occupied. Then she saw her target. Renetta Dolahan walked at the head of a small crowd of sneppards in suits. The group itself numbered close to a dozen, and sported an equal number of well-armed guards. Renetta herself was guiding them on a tour of the factory floor, another sneppard beside her aiding in her presentation. Salatra watched them through the glass, too high up to catch anyone's attention. She wasn't sure how much longer Dolahan's tour would last. She needed to get set up. Movement at the end of the hall yanked her attention away from the window. A door for another stairwell swung open as 3 guards entered her floor. Ducking into a crouch, she darted into the closest office. Her bag snagged on the corner of a bookshelf, causing several decorative items to sway. She reached out and caught the closest one, a glass vase with a small bouquet of flowers not more than a day old. Their scent was still fresh. Just out of her reach, a large metal plate shaped like a disc tilted free of the small wooden stand holding it in position. The stamped placard rolled only a few inches before falling off. Salatra tried to catch it with a booted foot, but it bounced off and clattered to the floor anyway. She stomped down on the plate, flattening it against the floor and stopping its racket. She needed to calm down. Hurrying was only going to make this whole thing harder. Voices picked up in the hallway outside. "You hear that? Hey! Anyone up here?" Oh, Fanina. Think, woman, think. "Janitor!" she yelled. "Sorry, I dropped something while dusting." Hopefully, that would keep them from entering the room with weapons at the ready, though their scent was getting stronger and held traces of fear and alarm. Working quickly, Salatra cracked a small tarum crystal with her teeth, dropping it into the vase. The water took on a faint green glow. Reaching out to the nature magic, Salatra used more of her prism to guide the energy into the flowers. Petals perked and expanded as the flowers began to grow with new life. They smelled so lovely, it made her sad to know she was about to ruin them. Loading a Necrom cartridge, she brought the catalyst up to the flowers and fired. A deep purple mist oozed from the barrel, and Salatra latched onto it with her prism. Even brushing up against void magic with her mind was unpleasant. The energy wanted to break down and decompose whatever it could find. Its desire for decay was almost lifelike, even if it was simply raw energy. She instructed it to wait, directing it into the flowers. The mist seeped into the petals, blanching them of color and leaving them sickly shades of gray. The mist seeped into the petals, blanching them of color and leaving them sickly shades of gray. Despite the visual disappearance of the necro cloud, Salatra still caught herself holding her breath instinctively. Dumping the spent Necrom cartridge to the floor, she kicked it away as she loaded the catalyst with an Electrum cartridge. I got distracted by the spammer. Try this again. Dumping the spent Necrom cartridge to the floor, she kicked it away as she loaded the catalyst with an Electrum cartridge. Eyeing the metal disc on the floor, another idea struck her. Testing the thought, she used a bit more prism to direct the flow of Electrum into her climbing suit, activating one of the electromagnets in her boot. The disc immediately clung to the boot, resting under her toes like a solid snowshoe. She had just enough time to fish a firearm cartridge from her belt when the first guard peeked into the room. His rifle bounced against the padded vest he wore, and his eyes immediately narrowed. Hiding the loaded catalyst behind her back, Salatra grabbed the vase and turned to face him. He looked her up and down, his own hand reaching for the unmistakable hilt of an Electrum baton. "Where's your badge? I'm going to need to see some ID." His expression changed as he met her eyes. She could see the moment when he mistook the prismatic glow and assumed her to be a fractal junkie. His posture relaxed enough to not want to shoot her, but he still looked like he was expecting her to do something stupid. He had no idea. "Of course," Salatra said, and risked taking a step closer. "Could you hold this for a second while I find it?" Cracking the firearm cartridge in her hand against the glass, She slipped it into the vase with her thumb and held it out to the guard. A new scent was produced, confusion, as she handed him the vase of dying flowers. Behind him, a second guard peeked into the room, female this time. The first guard took the vase with one hand, other hand resting on his still holstered baton. Both guards' expressions darkened as Salatra tapped her prism and reached out to the energy leaking from the compromised Fyrom crystal. Using prism always made the glow in the eyes sharper, brighter. Neither of them noticed as the water in the vase started to bubble. The female guard sighed, retrieving a pair of handcuffs from her belt. How'd she even get up here? These are lovely flowers, the guard said, in a tone that even an infant would doubt. But we're gonna need you to come with us. So we're gonna take you down to the lobby and call someone to come help you. Okay? Salatra shook her head. No, I'm not going anywhere. The second guard stepped into the room, flicking the handcuffs open with a practiced motion. Don't make things difficult. Nobody needs to get hurt. You're wrong, Salatra said. Then she held her breath and stoked the flames. The water in the vase superheated, shredding the flowers as it exploded out of its small glass confines. The guard screamed, hands passing through a dense cloud of purple pollen and flying up to his face. He clutched at his face, but the damage was done. Besides, the burns should be a lesser concern to him than the necral cloud he was now breathing in. Next to him, the second guard recovered from her shock. Dropping the handcuffs, she drew her electrum baton. With a twist, she activated it, and the end began to crackle with blue electricity. Two could play at that game. In one smooth motion, Salatra raised her catalyst and fired. The hammer cracked, and she reached out to the jittery mass of energy forming in the barrel. The energy of electrum reactions always felt rushed, like it was racing to get somewhere. So Salatra gave it a finish line and a clear path, through the guard and into the floor. Blue lines arced forward, spindly fingers reaching out to embrace a new friend. The woman convulsed as the burst of energy surged through her body. She curled in on herself, collapsing to the floor. Beside her, the first guard started to cough like he just choked on food. The purple cloud hung heavy around him, and Salatra took several steps away. She was just dumping the expended cartridge from her catalyst as the third guard stepped into the room. This one was also female, and she was raising her rifle to her shoulder. Kicking towards the woman, Salatra released the magnet's grip in her boot. The decorative plate she'd picked up detached and sailed across the room. It wasn't a motion Salatra was used to, though, so it collided with the woman's shin rather than anything more damaging. Dropping her catalyst back into its holster, Salatra raised an empty palm towards his guard and activated the magnet. The guard lurched as Salatra pulled on the gun, but the shoulder strap helped her keep a hold of her weapon. Moving towards the guard, Salatra used the last bit of prism still in her system to activate the magnet in her other hand, aiming it at the previous guard's electrum baton. Increasing the electrum flow to the magnet caused the baton to zip into her waiting hand. However, so did the discarded set of handcuffs, a set of keys, and several metal shirt buttons from the unconscious guard, all of which stuck to the back of her hand. She could feel the magnet trying to pull the objects through the glove and her hand, but with no more prism, she couldn't change the magnet's strength. The panicking guard managed to fire off a pair of shots before Salatra closed the distance. Salatra swung the baton in an arc, aiming for the neck to make skin contact, but the guard brought up her arm to block the blow, and the gun joined the mess of objects clinging to Salatra's hand. They fought over control of the weapon for a few seconds. The guard tried to shoulder into Salatra, and they both stumbled back, though neither lost their footing. Fresh pain danced across Salatra's stomach as the guard raked it with the claws of her hand. The guard pushed again, driving Salatra up against the wall. Salatra brought a foot up, kicking at the guard. It glanced off the woman's hip, disturbing the guard's own holstered electrum baton. The guard snarled, so close that Salatra could feel drops of spit splash through her fur. They're gonna lock you up, native, and throw away the key. Then she drew back and punched Salatra in the gut. Not expecting the blow, Salatra gasped, her body tightening as it tried to fight itself to breathe. A second punch landed as the guard released her grip on the gun. Salatra compressed her core, and this hit wasn't as bad. It aggravated the fresh cuts, but didn't knock the wind from her this time. This situation was uncomfortably familiar. Her back to the wall, while someone with a get-out-of-jail-free badge beat her. She hadn't thought about those days in a while, but the guard's words had brought the memories back to the surface. "They're gonna lock you up, native, and throw away the key." Yeah, they hadn't been able to follow up on that threat then, either. She definitely wasn't going to let them start now, just because she was older and her body less prone to forgiving her for acting young. Another punch landed, and instinct flooded back as she absorbed this blow too. With a growl of defiance, Salatra drove her knee into the guard's crotch. She wasn't expecting it to be quite as effective as in the past, but it still hurt to get hit there, regardless of gender. She hadn't accounted for the guard's armor. Her knee collided with some kind of protective plating, like a cup. The guard smirked, hitting her again. Salatra leaned into the blow, reaching for the guard's hip. She felt something snap to her palm as she found the guard's baton. Ripping it from the holster, she jammed it up into the guard's armpit. The woman grunted, then pinned the weapon under her arm. Salatra twisted, and the baton activated. An electric discharge ran through the guard. A few moments later, she was unconscious on the floor. Across the room, the original guard who found her was on his hands and knees, strings of saliva running to the ground as he continued to cough. Salatra introduced him to the electron baton, too. It took stepping on the baton to pull it free from the magnet in her hand. Thankfully, its charges had been spent, so she didn't have to worry about shocking herself. The metallic bit of the strap on her back stuck to her hand as she fished around for more prism. A few moments, and a deep breath later, and she was able to kill power to the magnets in her suit. Baton, gun, handcuffs, and everything else clattered to the floor. Testing the fingers of that hand, she was pleased to find that she only had a few bruises after all that. Her stomach, on the other hand, not so much. The snappered guard's claws had torn right through her poncho and the climbing suit's fabric. She'd missed any of the lines directing power from the electrum reaction to the magnets in the palms and boots. Those lines all ran along the back of the suit, but she was still going to have to stitch it back together, and she wasn't sure she had a matching thread color at home. A few lines of blood trailed down the front of the suit, wounds stinging in their exposure to open air. Having fresh prism in her system just made it even more noticeable. With a sigh, she loaded her catalyst with the Curum cartridge. It took a few minutes to treat her stomach. Her knee was bruised enough to make walking uncomfortable, so she treated it too. She had to restore her prism again after she finished. Salatra checked her stores. She'd used up a quarter of the prism she'd brought already. Checking the reaction window in the climbing suit's glove showed that it was a few minutes from needing to be replaced. She had 2 spares for that. She had plenty of crystals left. Probably. It was the prism that would run out first. Since that was the only way to cast magic within the bulb, she just had to live with the limitation. She glanced at the discarded rifles, but immediately dismissed them. She wasn't here to shoot people. Well, she wasn't here to shoot innocents, she hoped. She grabbed the electrum baton she hadn't discharged. The one she'd used had been rather effective, but as she turned it over in her hand, she saw that the reaction was almost spent. Rats. She had no way to recharge them herself, as they were designed for batteries, not her custom crystals. But she might be able to get more from other guards as she went. Exiting the office, Salatra checked out the window again. Dolahan was still giving her tour, and workers were still toiling away. The active guard presence on the main floor was strikingly noticeable from up here. It had easily doubled, and they were actually watching their surroundings now, instead of just chatting with their buddies. Yeah, they definitely knew she was here. Stepping into the stairwell the guards had come from, Salatra took 2 steps and froze. The air smelled wrong. There was a lingering stench of corpses. Necrom. It was coming from below her. In fact, the air above smelled cleaner. Leaning over the banister, she glanced up to see the roof access door for the stairwell. It was open. Glancing downwards, her fingers gripped the banister hard. She blinked twice to make sure her eyes weren't playing a trick. At the bottom of the stairwell, 2 guards were resting beside each other. She could smell the blood from here. She could smell a few other unpleasant odors, too. Those guards weren't just resting. What had happened here? She descended to the 4th floor and was heading towards the 3rd when she heard the shout. "Man down! Man down over here!" The cry echoed up the stairwell, and Salatra picked up her pace. "Go warn the boss!" someone else called. "Our intruder's already killed 2! Oh, Fanina. If they hadn't intended to shoot her on sight before, they certainly would now. According to the instructions, Dolahan was likely to retreat to a safe house if the guards felt there was an emergency. A pair of dead bodies likely constituted an emergency. Indeed, a glance out the window showed a swarm of guards gathering around Dolahan, separating her from her guests as they ushered her towards an exit. A gunshot rang out on the factory floor, though Salatra couldn't see who had fired it. The area below dissolved into panic. Several more gunshots followed, and Salatra tried and failed to spot the muzzle flashes. Dolahan's little group was slowed, but kept moving. Salatra took off in a sprint. Her knee twitched to remind her that it wasn't fully healed yet, but it didn't slow her pace. Dolahan would be heading for her car, which meant Salatra needed to get to the roof. Running for the staircase she'd entered by, Salatra fished through her bag for one of her spare electrum crystals for her suit. She was going to want a full charge for what was coming. Remnants of the previous crystal crunched underfoot as she slid the new crystal in place. Torquing the lid down cracked this crystal, and she saw the familiar blue glow appear in the reaction window. She shouldered into the door as she reached it, bursting into the stairwell. A cry of alarm echoed through the space as she collided with someone on the other side. Her momentum carried her and this new guard over the banner. Her momentum carried her and this new guard over the banister. Salatra called on the prism inside her, activating the magnet in one of her gloves. It snapped to the banister, leaving her dangling several stories up, but stopping her fall. The guard she'd run into was not so lucky. His scream continued until he hit the ground. Stairwells were turning out to be far more dangerous places than Salatra had realized. She hoped the guard had survived, but she didn't have time to check. Gripping the banister in both hands, she deactivated the magnet and hauled herself up and over. To her surprise, she was not alone on the stairs. Another guard stood with his back in the corner, rifle raised to his shoulders. Salatra reached her hand towards him, preparing to activate a magnet, but the guard squealed and let go of the gun, raising both his hands high. "Please, don't hurt me!" Something about his voice, his scent, was familiar. Then she saw the name badge pinned to his breast pocket. "Bryce? The kit from Lorthran Tower?" He nodded stiffly, like he was afraid if he moved his head too far up or down it would explode. "I was trying for a fresh start, you know. Security work's what I know. It's what I trained for. I'm not here to cause you problems. I'm so sorry. Please don't kill me." Salatra groaned, lowering her hand. "I've no desire to kill you." "But they said some other guards had already been killed, so when Henry told me to come with him away from the bodies, I thought that was a great idea. I thought we'd be safe on this end of the building, but you burst through the doors and killed him too. Oh, Anima's coming for me next." Salatra sighed. "Look, I'm not the devil herself, all right? The fall from this height, 3 stories, so that's, 36 feet? As long as he didn't land on his neck, your friend can probably be healed. If he's not dead, proper cure treatment should fix whatever I broke." "Are you gonna throw me down too?" Salatra pinched the bridge of her nose. "No, why would I? Look, me running into him was an accident. I didn't kill those guys in the other stairwell. I don't think I killed this guy, and I'm not going to kill you. The guys upstairs, they'll be fine in a little bit. Probably." "Upstairs? You did something upstairs? To multiple people?" Salatra cut off his blathering by leveling a finger at him. "Deep breaths, Kit. You're going to be fine, provided you let me leave. You are going to let me leave, right?" His tail hung completely limp, and he nodded with an energy his tail lacked. Then you'll be fine. Something about this kit activated something in Silatra. She knew why immediately. He reminded her of Rendal. So she did what came naturally. Stepping forward, she patted Bryce's cheek. She'd meant it as a comfort, but from the smell, she'd only made things worse. You should probably go check on your friend, Silatra called as she charged up the stairs. Then she paused. Bryce! He hadn't moved, and his eyes said that he was worried she'd changed her mind. Yes, Alchemanswer? The other guards, when they were running Dolahan off, did they happen to call out any numbers? Bryce frowned, then nodded. Something about a code 14, I think? It was loud and there were gunshots and maybe I misheard, but Silatra had what she needed, so she left him there. By the time she reached the roof, she couldn't hear him anymore. She kept running until she reached the side of the building with the garage. Dolahan kept 3 armored vehicles inside. In the case of an emergency, she'd be stuffed in one of them. All 3 would be loaded with guards, then head out in separate directions to make it harder to find her. However, her instructions had extensive notes on this. Each of the vehicles has a Try that again. Each of the vehicles had a designation. 96 for the one on the right, 53 for the one in the middle, and 14 for the one on the left. Trusting the instructions, Silatra positioned herself above the appropriate garage door. The metal ground spread out some 6 stories below her. Not much time for reactions. Just to be safe, Silatra took another dose of Prism. The previous one was still in her system, and she felt the beginnings of a high. That would go away as she used it. Prepping for the inevitable jump, she packed several Aurum cartridges in her cheeks for emergency use. Then, she grabbed an Aurum crystal, the size of an apple, from her bag. I looked away. That didn't help. Then she grabbed an Aurum crystal the size of an apple from her bag. She tapped it against the roof's edge, gauging how much force it would take to crack. From just the one tap, spiderwebs were already spreading, so not much force. More gunshots rang out from the factory. Frowning, Silatra turned and jogged over to a nearby skylight. Down below on the factory floor, several guards were taking shelter behind large equipment and taking shots at someone across from them. The figure was moving quickly, taking shots with a gun of their own. One of the guards dropped, and his neighbor tried to pull him behind cover. What was going on? Then she noticed what was trailing the figure, a brown and black tail. Had one of the workers taken the opportunity to grab a gun? The figure wasn't wearing factory garb. In fact, there was some green and white design on their back, though she couldn't make it out from this distance. Below her, Fyram engines roared to life. She stayed at the window long enough to see another guard collapse, then rushed back to her post. Crouching by the edge, she watched the doors below her roll open. Her fingers tensed on the Aurum crystal in her hand, her legs ready to spring like she was back in track and field. 3 large, horribly boxy vehicles emerged. Cracking the Aurum crystal against the roof, Silatra flung herself forward and entered freefall. Alright, I need to take a quick bathroom break, but I will be right back. All right. That's another chapter down. Silatra's on the hunt. So it turns out, when I actually drink water regularly, this whole experience is so much better. Who would have thought? Hmm. Crazy talk, right? Yeah. But I learned last week that having to re record lines after the fact is a little rough. It doesn't always sound the same. So you guys get the delight of when I screw up during a live read, I'm probably going to actually just start over. So that way I can just cut it down later and not have to insert and try to match because it just doesn't work very well. So you guys get the raw behind the scenes experience. But that's the fun of doing it live, right? I don't know why that message just got auto modded. um, but apparently, huh? I'm not sure how to change that setting, so sorry about that. But apparently, it decided to block the message for using the word hell, which a little wild to me. That seems on the mild side. Oh well. Yep, classic. When the auto mod goes after the mod. Wild. All right. You guys ready to keep going? The good news is we do continue with Salatra. So we don't end with her, being in free fall. We get to learn what happens next. All right. Chapter 6 Rough Ride. The sensation of falling was a familiar rush that played at the edges of Salatra's prism clarity. The strength of the rush only increased as she spent prism to harness the energy bursting from the Aurum crystal. She envisioned a stiff wind pushing against her from underneath and propelling her in the same direction as the vehicle containing Renetta Dolahan. The change in pressure was immediate, dampening her hearing for a few moments as the wind formed around her to slow her descent. Even with the sudden change in momentum, her nose came within inches of the roof of the armored vehicle. She reached down to catch herself, thankful for the roar of the vehicle's firing thrusters to muffle her landing. Activating a magnet in her glove, then both her boots, Salatra laid flat against the roof of the vehicle, hoping no one had seen her. All three vehicles formed into a small convoy, a cluster of hover bikes racing up to join them. The vehicle Salatra clung to was the last in line, which was just as well. She rolled her leg to the side anyway, trying to keep her poncho from flapping in the wind and catching the attention of the hoverbike-mounted guards pulling up to flank the armored car. One by one, each vehicle left the factory grounds, escorted by 4 hoverbikes. One on each side, and 2 following behind, they looked like little children staying with a teacher on a field trip. First group turned left immediately. The second group traveled forwards for several blocks, then turned right. Salatra's group kept going straight. 7 guards in the armored car beneath her, including the driver, plus 4 guards flanking on hoverbikes. 11 on one? Woof. 12 if Renetta turned out to be even remotely like Lortrim. Releasing her glove, Salatra pulled out her bismuth catalyst and glanced behind her. She couldn't see the hoverbikes behind them over the long roof of the armored car, but she had no doubt they were there. Inching along with her hands, she peered over the side to see how close those guards were. It took her only a second to realize they were within spitting distance. The guard on the side could easily reach out and touch the side of the car if he wanted to. That meant he was within electrum distance. She was about to load an electrum cartridge when a bullet zipped past her ear. Glancing back, she saw one of the rear bikers had spotted her when she stuck her head over the side. Worse, he'd drawn a handgun and was now firing at her. Loading the electrum cartridge anyway, she fired at the biker beside her before he could piece together why his buddy was shooting. Whoops. Loading the electrum cartridge anyway, she fired at the biker beside her before he could piece together why his buddy was shooting. Electricity jumped the gap between them, causing his bike to lose a bit of elevation. His muscles contracted, both increasing the throttle and veering the bike away from the car. The bike slammed into a building a few seconds later. 10 on 1. Another bullet zipped past, and Salatra pulled herself back towards the middle of the wide armored vehicle. Paper and shattered electrum were whisked away by the wind as she reloaded with a fresh cartridge. Crawling over to the other side, she glanced down to make eye contact with the guard below. This guard drew their own handgun. Salatra and the guard both aimed at each other and fired. Salatra flinched away, hearing the guard's bullet bounce off the car's armored plating. Unable to focus on directing the burst of energy, her own electrum arc went wide, sparking harmlessly through the air. She dragged herself back towards the center, reloading with firearm this time. Without looking, she fired over the side, stoking the fire magic to be as big and bright as she could make it. The resultant orange flash was hot against her hand and arm, but like the passing whiff of sulfur, it was gone in a moment. More importantly, she heard the sound of a collision. Checking over her shoulder, she saw that hoverbike partly embedded in the side of a parked vehicle. 9 on 1. The other two had fallen further back, and she could see them now. Both were taking shots with pistols. Both were out of range of either firearm or electrum. Time to get creative. Thankfully, this was the start of growth season, and it was a rather warm night. Salatra reached to reload, but was forced to clamp down with a magnetized glove as the car took a hard right. Her bag slid into her, several large crystals rolling out, one of which hit her in the chin. She grabbed for them with her free hand, saving all but an apple-sized aurum crystal which disappeared off the side of the car. She smelled the pawns before she saw them, a fresh, humid scent competing with the exhaust rising from this car's thrusters. 100 Fyrum lights danced upon the surface of the waters, each a tiny sun reflected in the ripples. She'd walked this street during the day, and thought she'd appreciated the ponds then. It'd taken her several hours to walk their entire circumference. Seeing them like this was entrancing. 2 more gunshots broke through her reverie. Salatra sighed as reality once again ripped away the tranquility she longed for. She retrieved one of the crystals she'd managed to save, a large, blue aquam crystal she could almost close her fingers around. With a tap to the corner of the vehicle, she started a crack. As the reaction began, she slipped it into a poncho pocket. So much aquam energy was being produced that reaching out to shape it felt a bit like experiencing brain freeze. She could feel heat getting sucked away, even through the pocket. Good. What did you get when you experienced a rapid drop in temperature on an otherwise warm, humid night? Fog spilled out of her pocket, then from the very air above her as Salatra directed the aqua magic to flash freeze the air around the vehicle. Seconds later, there was enough fog trailing them that she lost sight of the 2 remaining guards on hoverbikes. Their voices carried, so they were still following, but Salatra's hope was that they were less likely to try to shoot something they couldn't see. An explosion sounded, distant and faint, as Salatra sat up, loading an aquam cartridge into her catalyst. Alternating use of her magnets, she made her way up to the front of the vehicle, dropping down the side to cling to the driver's door. When she tapped the glass with her catalyst, the driver glanced her way. Salatra mouthed the words, "Stop the car." With a scowl, the driver jerked the steering wheel to the left. They sideswiped another parked car, shoving it into a Fyrum streetlight with a shower of sparks. Salatra had to yank her legs up to keep them from getting smashed between the two cars. That's how this was going to be? Fine. Pressing the barrel to the glass, Salatra fired. A wave of frost spread from the point of contact. The prism was starting to run low, but she still had plenty for a simple use like this. A few seconds later, and the entire window was frosted over. She had to climb up a few feet to avoid another car as the driver tried a second time to knock her free. More fog spilled from her pocket, beads of condensation forming along the body and roof of the armored car. Loading another aquam crystal, she added more frost to the window. Inside, she could see the driver use their arm to try to clear the window, but of course, that didn't change anything. Loading an aurum crystal this time, Salatra grabbed a fresh prism canister. Biting off the tip, she started to inhale. A gunshot rang out, and the canister flew from her hand. That bullet had come within an inch of her face. Looking towards the back of the vehicle, she saw one of the hover bikes less than 10 feet away. The guard riding it was ducking against their bike, trying to see under the fog Salatra was still emitting. She didn't miss the handgun pointed her way. Making a snap decision, Salatra trusted the amount of prism in her system to last, and deactivated all her magnets. Pushing off the side of the armored car put her directly in the path of the hoverbike, and she slammed into the rider. Activating the magnet in her offhand, she felt her hand fixed to some part of the hoverbike, the rest of her body awkwardly shoved into this guard's lap. The hoverbike dipped under their combined weight, and the guard's own panic nearly led them to clip the side of the armored car. Pressing the catalyst to his chest, Salatra fired. Latching onto the release of aurum energy, she focused it into a concentrated burst. The immediate pressure change forced her and the rider in opposite directions. Salatra was flung over the handlebars, while the rider was sent off the back of the hoverbike to disappear into the fog. 8-on-1. Her legs dragged along the metal street underneath the hoverbike as her body twisted around. Her shoulder ached where her body had rotated around her hand. The magnet had kept the wrist from rotating, and something had needed to give. With no one running the bike, it naturally started to slow. Getting her feet under her, Salatra corrected her orientation, crawling over the handlebars and releasing the magnet as she settled into the seat. Several parts of her body cried out at once, each demanding her attention like a hungry child. There was no time for Curum. She was already beginning to lose sight of the armored car. Glancing at the handlebars, this was a much newer model than the last hoverbike she'd ridden. That made sense. A lot tended to change with 30 years of innovation. Surely the basics were still the same. Playing with the foot pedals lifted the hoverbike, so those clearly moderated flow of power to the electrum repulsors. Gripping the handlebars, she torqued the throttle. The hoverbike lurched beneath her, like that one punk in a street race who jumped the starting gun too early. Squeezing the sides of the bike with her knees, she eased into the throttle this time, wind blowing her hood back as she sped off. The reaction from the aquam crystal in her pocket had finally run out. No more fog spilled out, though the pocket itself was thoroughly coated in a thin layer of ice. Wind tore at her poncho, and Salatra flattened her ears as the speed indicator on the hoverbike rapidly climbed past 85. Ahead, the armored car turned onto a bridge that crossed over the ponds. That would lead to Aberway Park and one of the canal shipyards. Were they hoping to lose her there? Salatra swung out to make the turn, but did so far too early. The hoverbike's thrusters were so responsive she almost drove onto the sidewalk, which would have made the repulsors useless. With her rusty reflexes, she barely kept it on the street. Whoops. With her rusty reflexes, she barely kept it on the street. Apparently, you didn't need to compensate so much for momentum anymore. Unlike the old models, with most of their thrusters at fixed angles, all of this hoverbike's thrusters seemed fine-tuned to adjust as she turned, making it handle much closer to a vehicle with wheels. The mistake cost her some speed, and she made the turn onto the bridge more carefully. Several gunshots rang out from behind her, and she ducked against the hoverbike. The last biker had caught up. This rider made the turn without issue, putting them just seconds behind Salatra. The guard in pursuit had several advantages over her. First, they were used to this style of hoverbike, so she probably wouldn't be able to outrun them or outmaneuver them. Second, they had a gun, so maintaining distance would help them and endanger her. Even if it meant risking a few more shots, she needed to close the gap. Sparks flew as Cilatra twisted the foot pedals in opposite directions, dropping the repulsors on one side low as she spun the hoverbike around. Re-engaging the repulsors, she eased into the throttle, heading back the way she had come. The guards slowed, taking both hands off the handlebars to steady their aim. They fired several more They fired several more shots at what they likely assumed was a fleeing target. She wasn't fleeing. With a better feel for how quickly these things could turn, Cilatra waited for the last second, then turned to ram the other hoverbike. She activated every magnet in her suit as they collided, keeping her in her seat. Her skeleton and internal organs still tried to leave her body, but there were too many layers in place to keep them from escaping. The other hoverbike wound up absorbing most of the momentum, gliding several feet before slamming into the bridge's guardrail. Its rider slid off, collapsing to the street. Cilatra had managed to pin their leg as part of the impact, so they shouldn't be in any position to follow. 7-on-1. Only the guards in the armored car remained. Spinning the hoverbike around again, Cilatra sped across the bridge. The front part of the bike was heavily damaged now, crumpled like a ball of paper. A couple of maneuvering thrusters in the front had been smashed, so she had to hold the handlebars at a slight angle to keep the thing going straight. Her brain hadn't appreciated hugging the inside of her skull, and it added its own complaints to the write-up her body was preparing for her regarding its treatment. Again, she didn't have time for Curum, but she did take in another prism canister. It made the pain sharper, like the pricks of a dozen needles rather than the pinch of a single spike. Rather than everything hurting, now she could tell exactly which parts of her hurt. That was the price she had to pay, because that level of clarity was worth maintaining. The smell of fresh blossoms accompanied the chlorinated scent of the ponds as she arrived in Aberway Park. To her surprise, the armored car had stopped, pulling off into a well-lit parking area. Two large doors at the back swung open, and the guards inside started to pile out. Rolling the now soggy Aurum cartridges around in her mouth, Cilatra worked them under her teeth. Reaching into her alchemical pouch, she pulled out the first large crystal she could find. Blessedly, it was also Aurum. She jammed the crystal as best she could into the crumpled mess that was the front of the hoverbike, then increased the throttle. The speed indicator climbed past 80, then 90 as she steered directly for the back of the armored car. About half the guards had already gotten out, one of which was helping Dolahan step down, while the other two raised rifles and started firing. They only squeezed off a couple shots each before realizing that she wasn't slowing down. They dove to either side as the hoverbike bore down on them. Seconds before the impact, Cilatra chomped down, using the subsequent rush of wind energy to slow her momentum as she leapt from the back of the hoverbike. It was like hitting a wall that only gave in spots as the air buffeted her, but it did slow her enough that she hit the ground in a run. The hoverbike entered the armored car in a shower of sparks, crumpling against the inside with a horrible series of metallic screams. The Aurum... Try that again. The Aurum crystal she'd planted went off a moment later. With no prismatic direction, the energy from the reaction released in all directions, flinging the remaining guards into sidewalls that now bulged outward. Cilatra ran for the closest guard, who was still reeling and clutching his ears from the nearby pressure detonation. Her own hearing was dulled too, but she wouldn't need it for this part. The guard's hands came back to his rifle as he saw her, but before he could raise it to his shoulder, she was already on him. Rather than deal with the armored parts that had caused her so much grief back in the factory, she drove her foot down into the sneppered man's exposed toes. Sneppards in any kind of enforcement tended to wear open-toed shoes in case they needed to make use of their retractable claws. Normally, this was an advantage for them. But on a metal street? Cilatra activated the magnet in her boot, flooding it with enough electricity that she felt the moment when the bones in the guard's toes crunched. Deactivating the magnet, she capitalized on his disorientation. Like the other guard she'd seen tonight, he had an electrum baton strapped to his hip. Utilizing a glove's magnet to rip it free, she snagged the baton, activated it, and drove it into the man's neck like she meant to crush his windpipe. He dropped, convulsing. Trusting the baton to retain some charge, Solatra ran for the second guard. She aimed for his neck too, but he caught her arm on the way. She was taller than him, but he was definitely stronger. As they fought over the baton, she grabbed a cartridge from her belt, praying it wasn't Necrum as she brought it to her teeth and crushed it. A wave of cold water. Oh. A wave of cold washed over her tongue and cheeks, and her mouth opened with an involuntary gasp. Then she latched onto the aquam energy, directing it to crystallize as she breathed ice into the guard's face like the dragons of stories. Turning away, the guard swiped at his face as if he could bat the frost away. Bringing the hand that had grabbed hers to her face, she bit down, directing the last of the reaction into the man's hand. Blood rushed into her mouth, freezing against her tongue. He let go of her then, and she rammed the baton into his neck. Swiping this man's baton, she ignored the awful pinpricks of numbness that made her tongue feel like a popsicle in her mouth. Breathing hard from the exertion was still creating puffs of frost in the air before her. Turning to the last guard, who was checking on his employer. Dolahan had been thrown to the ground by the pressure burst. Glancing inside the vehicle, Solatra saw bodies, but no movement. Ears still dulled, she crossed the distance to this guard. He saw her coming, drawing his own baton, and putting himself between her and his boss. Squaring off against each other like this was going to suck. There were no winners in a knife fight. She was going to get hit if she closed the gap. All she could do was ensure she took him down as part of it. They took a few test swipes at each other, blue electricity crackling on their weapons. Solatra could smell the ozone their batons were producing in this humid air. She clung to that prism-enhanced clarity, looking for an opening for the guard's neck. She found it, lunging and making contact. Unfortunately, she took the guard's baton to the gut. It made partial contact with her skin through the rips that had been formed in her fight back at the factory. They convulsed in unison as electricity ran through both of their bodies. The magnets in her suit activated in response to the electric surge, clamping her to where she stood on the street. Prism was the only thing that kept her conscious before the guard's baton slipped and stopped shocking her. With a gasp, Solatra's lungs eagerly drew in oxygen again. Ignoring her body's needs, she killed power to the magnets in her suit, leaning forward to keep the baton pressed to the guard's neck. It stayed there until the battery was drained and the guard collapsed to the street. Movement directed her attention to the front of the car. A blast of electrum from her catalyst was enough to drop the driver as he stumbled out his door. The frost on the window was only just beginning to melt. Blood ran down her fingers as Solatra reloaded the catalyst with another electrum cartridge. Content that no more guards were coming, she walked back to face Renetta Dolahan. Solatra's vision blurred. Her ears rang, and just about every part of her body was screaming at her. The screams were muted by adrenaline and prism for now, but that wouldn't last. Besides, she was the only person on the scene who was still standing, loose as that definition might be. She needed to get her answers and go. Grabbing Dolahan by the shoulder, she propped the woman up against the car's bumper, pushing her roughly into a seated position. The poor woman was clearly dazed, her ears nearly flat to her skull, and her eyes staring at nothing in particular. Bits of her business suit were smudged and even torn in places. Solatra patted her down anyway, looking for likely places to stash a gun or some other weapon. She found the woman's wallet, a small makeup kit, a red lipstick that matched what she currently wore, and an ID card marking her as the factory CEO, but no weapons. Letting her keep it all, she gripped the woman's shoulder again, hauling her to her feet. Dolahan stumbled forward, eyes regaining a bit of life as Solatra put the catalyst barrel against the woman's side. "Let's take a walk." Dolahan licked her lips, her voice coming out strained and slurred at first, but regaining strength with every word. "You've come to kill me. Why not just kill me here and be done with it? You take hostages now." Blood ran from Dolahan's ears, joining a cut in the side of her head where she must have hit the street. Salatra steered them into the park, aiming to get them out of eyesight of the vehicle before any of the guards regained consciousness. I want answers. Someone wants you and others like you dead, and I want to know why. Dolahan snorted, wiping her cheek with a torn sleeve. It's cats and dogs, love. One's always going to want the other dead. That's why you're going to kill me. That's not a good enough reason. Look, something has changed about all of this. In the past, there was a month or more in between targets. It's barely been a week since I was sent after Lortrin, and now I've been sent after you. Why the sudden rush? Who wants you dead? As they passed under some of the park's famous cherry trees... As they passed under some of the park's famous cherry trees, a fallen branch crunched beneath Dolahan's decorative heels, and she stumbled. Salatra kept her from falling, entwining their arms more tightly. Dolahan mumbled her thanks, then seemed to wish she could take it back. Instead, she shook her head as they walked. Money? Power? My position as a 13? There's already a lot of openings to fill in that regard. I don't know. How much are they paying you? It probably isn't enough, and I'm sure I could beat it. Salatra said nothing, mind racing. She'd already guessed those reasons, but they weren't specific enough. She needed to ask better questions. Dolahan beat her to it. Who hired you? Was it Evo? Those fanatics have wanted my factory shut down for years. Just a bunch of tree-hugging nulfs who think technology comes from anima. They finally grew balls and sent someone to follow through on their empty threats. Didn't think you guys had it in you. You're just a bunch of dirty street rats. Salatra tried to suppress her snarl, but it was as effective as plugging a hole in the bottom of a flask with just her fingers. Are you trying to give me a reason to want you dead, too? Don't you? Salatra drew in a deep breath, pulling on a bit of prism to maintain her composure. They approached a fountain, and she pushed Dolahan towards it. Take a seat, drop the unnecessary commentary, and answer my questions. Glancing down at the catalyst in Salatra's hand, Dolahan smirked, but obeyed. Using her hand to guide her own tail out of the way, she sat down. One knee crossed over the other, and she clasped the top knee with both hands. Why should I help someone who's about to kill me? Because we have a common enemy. The people who want to kill you have something of mine. I want them gone just as much as you do. Dolahan raised an eyebrow at this, the smirk of a woman used to getting her way still plastered on her face. I own the largest Fyrum, Electrum, and Aquam factories in all of Cyphus. I'm worth billions of Christum, and not only do I keep my workers from starving, my batteries help everyone in Cyphus to have easier lives. What could you possibly have of equal value to that? Salatra's lips rolled, and her finger twitched against the trigger. If Evo's contacted you before, how do I find them? Dolahan laughed, like she was a socialite at a public dinner. Evo is a group of zealous idiots who don't understand that wealth is what makes the world go round. They've sent death threats before. I've simply ignored them in the past. I imagine that's one reason for our current situation, love. Salatra thought back over the last 6 members she'd killed. Number 4 had also mentioned Evo. It was a familiar name to Salatra, one that dug up painful memories. The Evo Salatra knew had disbanded when their leader had been killed. They'd never been violent to begin with, and even if they'd had a change of heart, they shouldn't still be around to harass the 13 anymore. The very first 13 that Salatra had been sent to assassinate had mentioned Dolahan's name, but she wasn't proving nearly as helpful as Salatra had hoped. Number 3 had mentioned another name. What about Robert Paddock? Dolahan laughed again. Paddock? He's a dullard, not a visionary. Spends too much time on the golf courses and in the pleasure parlors. Has more money to burn than I bring in as profit in a year, which is singularly infuriating. But unlike him, I take care of those who work for me. A glint came to her eyes then, dangerous and predatory. Perhaps that could come to include you? Salatra hesitated. Nights like this were costly. High-grade prism was expensive, especially if you didn't want it to be cut with cheap but toxic filler.
The cost of reactants was also on the rise, and with the quantities she'd needed recently, it was only a matter of time before she got caught stealing. Silatra's reputation was not built on overthinking. Lightning was not known for deliberating where to strike. It was a thing of action, of decisiveness. You couldn't control a reaction if you spent too much time worrying about all the ways it might blow your fingers off. Alchemy was just as much about trusting your gut as running calculations. So she squeezed the trigger. An electric burst embraced Dolahan, her eyes wide as she collapsed to the ground. The air was left with the smell of crisp ozone and chlorine. Silatra let out a breath as she lowered the catalyst. She brought one hand across to steady the shaking of the one holding the catalyst. Now she was faced with a choice. One that risked... Now she was faced with a choice. One that risked invalidating the last few months. One that could cost her everything she had left. Everything she was trying so hard to save. That's when she noticed the wet. Bringing her hand away, the fingers were slick. Her catalyst grip was smeared with red. Her dwindling prism held back the pain about as well as the bullet hole in her glove was holding back her own blood. Staring down at the unconscious woman before her, what hurt more than the fresh hole in her hand was knowing that her mind was already made up. She was committing to a path forward, one with an outcome she couldn't yet see. But one thing was certain. Tonight, the journey home was going to suck.
All right. How's everybody doing?
That's 2 chapters for the night. And in fact, based on the time, and based on how much consistently drinking water is helping, I think I got one more chapter in me. You guys want one more?
I want one more, so I'm probably gonna just do it. Hey, welcome. Stream is going well. You missed the exciting bits, but you can always go back and watch them later. And not to say that this next part isn't going to be, well, it'll be, you'll see. All right. Chapter 7, Rise and Shine. 6 of 13 remain. Leo slammed his fist down on the snooze. The stab of pain from the knob was preferable to the horrible ringing that wanted to murder his eardrums. Blessed silence fell over his room, and he almost fell right back to sleep. That lasted about 30 seconds before reality kicked in. He couldn't risk another demerit, or the chief would force him to take some time off. Time to himself was the last thing Leo needed. His sheets bunched and cascaded around him as he dug his claws into his apartment's awful shag carpet and dragged himself out of bed and onto the floor. He didn't even bother opening his eyes as he cranked out his morning push-ups to get the blood flowing. Smacking the bathroom handle with the back of his hand mostly hid the static shock that followed. His fur was matted where he'd slept on it, and his bed fur was about the only reason he decided to shower in the mornings. He always hoped that the deluge of water would help wake him up, but he showered in hot enough water that sometimes it lulled him back to sleep. Last time that had happened, he hadn't woken up until the water turned cold. Those 5 minutes of extra sleep had been worth it. Despite keeping his eyes closed the whole time, he managed to stay awake in the shower today. He wasn't happy about it, but there was nothing inherent to mornings to be happy about. After finishing his morning bathroom routine and reluctantly getting dressed, Leo stumbled into the kitchen. He didn't need to turn on... He didn't need to turn on any lights because that dreaded monster, the sun, was intruding the sanctity of his home through the large holes moths had left in his curtains. Leo had told the landlord to fix it and get him new curtains. The landlord had refused to do so until Leo paid off his outstanding late fees. Coming to such an impasse, Leo had just accepted that if he wanted new curtains, he'd have to get them himself.
His breakfast routine brought the only comfort he would know before midday: a trio of white crest eggs, a bagel toasted to perfect crispness, and coffee with 2 scoops of cream and 3 scoops of sugar. The eggs came out with just the right consistency, and the bagel made a satisfying crunch. If your bagel didn't scrape your tongue just as much as your tongue scraped the bagel, then Leo didn't want it. His cream ran out partway through the first scoop. Scowling, he checked his refrigerator, moving a few stray condiments as if they were hiding a large cream container. He scoured his cupboards, but he could see the back without issue. He added an extra scoop of sugar, hoping that might make up for the lack of cream. It didn't, but he needed the caffeine anyway. The note on the refrigerator read, "Replace the cream." He'd left that note nearly a week ago, but payday wasn't for another 2 days. It'd been hard enough dropping from 3 scoops of cream per cup to 2 just to stretch it out. If things continued as they had been, he'd have to drop that down to 1. Based on the sampler he currently drank from, that was an awful prospect. He'd have to bite the bullet and swing by the store today. He'd just taken another bite of dry bagel when the phone rang. His bed called to him from across the house with its siren song of rest and contentment. Despite his better judgment, he ignored it, swallowed the bagel, and picked up the phone. "Leo?" Leo bristled at the chipper voice, even as his conscience tore into him for doing so. Forcing a smile he didn't feel, Leo spoke for the first time since the day before. "Tolson." "Got an address for you. Chief says we lost another one of the 13 last night."
How soon?
"Chief and I are already here. I'm actually calling from a payphone right now, so, probably soon, buddy."
Great.
Moira's pleasant dreams of a peaceful meal with her parents were shattered as her alarm clock screamed her to consciousness. Stupid blaring thing. She'd explicitly yanked the Electrum batteries out last night because she didn't want to go to school today. There was supposed to be a parent-student lunch thing, and if her mother wasn't going to make an appearance, why should she? "Miss Moira, I'm afraid you need to get up now," her butler said, about 5 feet from her bed. So that's who'd replaced the batteries. Traitor. Gripping her covers, Moira pulled them up over her ears and rolled over in bed. "I'm not going today," she grumbled, "so leave me alone." There was a soft click as Sergei shut off the alarm clock. An enormous but gentle hand rested on her shoulder through the covers. "There are many things in life we don't want to do, Miss Moira, but that does not give us the excuse to hide from them." "I'm not hiding. I'm sleeping in total safety from the rest of the world." "Sleep is important, but not at the cost of shirking one's duties." Moira groaned into her pillow. "Is Mom gonna be there?" The pause that followed spoke volumes. By the time Sergei spoke, she already knew the answer, and it wasn't a surprising one. "She's been made aware of it. I'm sure that she will come if she has time." "Like she came for my birthday?" The bed barely moved as Sergei sat down beside her. His thumb traced small circles as he gave her shoulder a soft squeeze. "I'm sorry, Miss Moira." "Don't be. You're not the one who forgot. At least you were there. What's Mom's excuse?" A tear dropped onto her pillow, and she rolled her eyes. She did not need Sergei to see her crying. Dabbing at her eyes with the covers, she took a shaky breath to recover and emerged from the dark safety into obnoxious sunlight. Rolling over to face him, she stared up at Sergei, daring him to make an excuse for her mother. He offered no such excuse. Instead, he gave her a pained smile. "I am sorry, Miss Moira. I should have done more to remind her." Moira swallowed a growl. "Seed mother, Sergei. Stop trying to take responsibility for my mom being a sucky parent. Can't be mad at you for much, but if you keep trying to take the blame for stuff that isn't your fault, I will get mad at you." With a sigh, Sergei released her shoulder and brought his large, gloved hands to his lap. "Very well, Miss Moira. I'm sorry." Reaching out, she smacked his side with the back of her hand. It was about as effective as smacking a wall and expecting it to budge. Her mouth contorted in agitation at a fresh realization. The adult thing to do is to go, whether or not Mom shows up, isn't it? Sergei's long muzzle was taken over by a pleasant smile, one of the few smiles around here that she could trust to be genuine. Indeed. At the very least, we can enjoy it together. If your mother shows up, then that will be a pleasant surprise for both of us. Besides, I've not had time to check, but there's always a chance she'll be around for breakfast this morning. Right. Still, she shouldn't fault him for his optimism. All he wanted to do was help her feel better. Fine, I'll go. Very good, Miss Moira. The car will be ready when you are. He pushed Stan from the bed, but Moira sat up and hugged him before he could. It was about like hugging a tree, dressed in a fine suit jacket that creased from the force of her hug. It was never something she would have done in public, but here in the safety of her room, there was no security or staff to think less of her for showing affection for the people she actually cared about. Her dad used to hug her. It was Mom who seemed to believe that public displays of affection, or even emotion, were an exploitable weakness and should thus be avoided at all costs. Hugging her driver wasn't weird. In many ways, he was the uncle she'd never had, so nobody who saw them would get any wrong ideas. They were truly friends and looked out for each other. He'd been there for her in her darkest days, unlike a certain mother of hers. With a quiet cough into his glove, Sergei cleared his throat. If you're trying to get me to carry you to breakfast, Miss Moira, you're first going to have to convince me that your legs no longer work. Well, I haven't used them since yesterday. For all I know, they could have broken overnight. That would be quite tragic. However, I am your driver, not your car. As your arms seem to work just fine, you can crawl to the garage, and I'll lift you into the car from there. Moira scoffed. Wow, thanks, Sergei. I feel really loved. Chuckling, he reached down to pat her hands. You are quite welcome, Miss Moira. I'm here to help. He helped more than he knew, and more than Moira cared to admit. So she gave him another squeeze and a quiet thank you. Of course. She released him a few moments later, and he stood. His tail had decorated her covers with russet strands of fur, and he dutifully swept them off with his hand. The maid would have cleaned the bedding today anyway, but Sergei's personal penchant for neatness was borderline religious. Dusting off his white gloves, he gave a small bow. Enjoy your breakfast, Miss Moira. I will see you at your car. Driving with the windows down meant that the knuckle smell was all but gone as Leo pulled up to the Electrum factory. There was a bit left on his tongue, but he washed it away with subpar coffee. Tolson was watching for him as he pulled in. Of course he was. Surely the devil got her kicks from making sure Leo could never just have a quiet start to his day. Let that blue witch Anima choke on her necrum. Leo grabbed the essentials from his car. Pen, notepad, coffee, pack of necrolls. His eyes flitted to the glove box, but he dismissed it. Tolson waved, and Leo walked over. Give me the gist. Well, your shirt's untucked, your left shoe's untied, and you forgot to comb behind your ears. Leo stared at his friend through half-lidded eyes, then turned and started walking back towards his car. Wait, where are you going? Somewhere the sun can't reach me. We're in between time cycles, Leo. The sun's going to be up for another 30 hours or so. Leo had already made it back to his car with one hand pulling the handle by the time Tolson jogged up. Leo, you okay, dude? Leo sighed, letting the handle snap closed. I ran out of creamer this morning. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, dude. Should I get lunch today? Shaking his head, Leo wrapped his fingers against the top of his car. Tolson was unbearably cheery some days, but thank the Seed Mother that he was so perceptive. He deserved a better friend than Leo. That would help, Leo admitted. Alright, so minimal joking, maximal working. I could do that. It's a doozy, though. I know I said that last time, but this one's worse. We got several dead guards, quite a few injured, There was an attempt to blow up the factory, an armored vehicle convoy that got wiped out, and best we can tell, Renetta Dolahan was dumped in the reclamation portion of the ponds. Nasty way to go if it's true, and won't leave much of a body to recover. I don't plan to drink from the tap for a while. No. Is that all? Tolson shrugged. Lots of property damage, both here and on the road to the ponds, but witness stories confirm there was a Nulf here causing a lot of havoc last night. Same description as the other incidents targeting the 13? Seems like it. Leo's morning scowl deepened. You didn't have the decency to wait before going on a fresh rampage? Thought she was used to giving us a month of breathing room in between. Now it's been a week? That's why the chief's here. He's worried this is some pretty aggressive escalation. Yeah, that seems like an accurate assessment. With as much money as these people make, you'd think they could afford better security. Tolson shrugged again, though his smirk said that he agreed with the statement. Leo sighed, continuing to drum his thumb against the top of his car door. It's gonna be a long morning, isn't it? Walter Bradburn, Chief of Cyphus Police for District 3, was the biggest man on the force. Only his nephew Tolson came close to matching him, but Walter was better about converting mass to muscle. Tolson was content to scrape by on the annual physicals, like a person who only brushed their teeth the day before visiting the dentist. His uncle, however, kept in peak physical condition, like his job as police chief would one day necessitate the ability to lift a car to save a life. As such, Chief Bradburn wasn't hard to find. He towered over the head of Dolahan's security, whose own ears and tail betrayed the chief's intimidation factor. Leo and Tolson stopped short so as not to interrupt the conversation. No civilian injuries? You're willing to go on record about that? The head of security straightened up, but the tips of his ears still only came up to the chief's chin. His tail swished with a nervousness that, to his credit, was absent from his voice. Absolutely, sir. Run plenty of drills with these men, and I trust their trigger discipline. How about their aim? Did they hit the killer, or are we just going to find a bunch of bullets lodged in the walls? You have to understand, sir, there were a lot of workers still on the factory floor at the time. If my men had been loose with their fire, then it would have been impossible to prevent civilian injuries. As is, I'm incredibly proud of my men for how they handled themselves. They were up against a force of nature. All things considered, they did well, despite our overall failure. The chief's arms were crossed, muscles bulging so much it was a wonder he had any shirts that could fit over them. He tapped a finger on his bicep. Say that, and yet look at all the destruction caused by a single uncaged native. She can't have been bigger than you. The security head glared up through furrowed eyebrows. She wasn't, sir, but she didn't see what she could do. She took out one of our convoys by herself, commanding ice and fire and lightning like some sort of elemental. Those live outside the bulb. And what I saw last night was something possessed. Nearly bouncing in place beside him, Tolson broke into the conversation. How close did you get? Chief Bradburn shot a look of annoyance at his sister's kid, but Tolson was unfazed. He was about the only one on the force who could get away with interrupting the chief. Dolahan's security head turned, sizing up Tolson with a glance. Whatever initial assumptions he made were guaranteed to be wrong, but Tolson liked it that way, and Leo couldn't blame him. I had her. I stuck her in the stomach with a shock baton, but she got me in the neck. Just admitting that made the man visibly lose an inch of height. Chief Bradburn cleared his throat. And that was the last time you saw your employer? The head of security's nose twisted, and Leo watched him drive his claws into his own palms. That is when I failed Miss Dolahan. She was behind me before that native jumped us. Then he turned towards Tolson, as if looking for support. The native drove a hover bike straight into the back of the car. The whole thing exploded. It's like she's got a death wish. With a mournful shake of his head, he concluded, Mrs. Dolahan was gone when I regained consciousness. Nodding, the chief thought for a few moments before speaking. Thank you. You're free to go check in on your men, but don't leave the premises. I'm sure my detectives will want to speak to you. Detectives? Plural? Leo spotted her about 100 feet away, talking with a heavily bandaged guard. Detective Melissa McKinley hadn't noticed him yet, and Leo had no intention of changing that. Scanning about, he didn't see any sign of the alchemist. He leaned into Tolson. Chief didn't call him the teacher? Tolson looked around, then shrugged. He said he was planning to. Well, then where is she? So let's use this one. Naira awoke with a start. Her entire body protested as she bolted from her bedroom. She took the stairs 2 at a time and just barely managed to catch the phone before a 4th ring. Hello, Naira here. Miss Naira, this is Jenny with Fossman University. I tried calling earlier, but it said the line was disconnected. The phone lines out here are only in service from 0800 to 1800. I'm sorry for the trouble. How may I help you? The woman on the other end hesitated. The police have contacted the headmaster again for assistance, and you've been asked to respond. Naira shifted the phone to her other hand, having grabbed it with her dominant hand out of habit. Even through the bandages, holding objects still hurt. I'm terribly sorry, but I was in an accident yesterday, and I'm afraid I've injured myself falling down my stairs. If you could ask them to send someone else, that would be acceptable. Silence crackled across the line. The headmaster said it has to be you, and that I'm to give you the address where you are supposed to be. Your classes today have been covered, so at least you don't have to walk around campus. What? From your fall? Down the stairs? Oh, no, but really, someone else should. The headmaster said to inform you that your schedule next semester will be dependent on the reviews he receives regarding your help and usefulness to the police. I would not recommend ignoring this. Naira was about to form a very polite but pointed response when a scream echoed up from the basement. There was a pause on the phone. Miss Naira, is everything all right? Oh, yes. I, just stubbed my toe while grabbing my things. And using the phone? Of course. Please be sure to tell the headmaster that I'm on top of it. Would you like the address, then? Naira fumbled for a pen and piece of scrap paper. Her thumb didn't want to grip the way it should. She nearly dropped the pen when another scream rang out. Despite her misgivings, the operator provided the address, which Naira scribbled down. Naira forced out a quick... Terrible time for a burp. Naira forced out a quick, "Thank you for your time," and slammed the receiver down. The scream continued, so Naira stomped the floor twice. The sound paused, then started up again. Fine. The woman wanted to scream herself hoarse? Let her. After all, who is going to respond in this neighborhood? Naira rubbed her palms against her eyes, yawning as she stepped into the kitchen. Warm rays flooded the room through the window, and Naira leaned against the sink, drinking in the sunlight. Grabbing a clean bowl from the neat stack in the cupboard, she filled it halfway with dry cereal. Inside the refrigerator, she had to scoot a few crystallization molds aside to get at the milk. Unscrewing the cap, she gave it a careful sniff. It was a trace of sour. Should be good for another 4 days or so. She flicked away her eye crusties with a finger as she made herself a cup of coffee. Every time she passed through the warm sunlight, she smiled. She couldn't help herself. Mornings were wonderful. More screams from the basement. Yeah, that should probably be dealt with. Sliding a spoon into her bowl, she grabbed her cereal and her coffee and made her way to the basement. The wooden stairs creaked as she descended. Yet another thing Elaine had never had time to fix. The floor was cold against her padded feet, her claws clicking against the concrete. She'd forgotten to trim them with how frequently she'd been wearing boots recently. Through the gaps in the bare studs down here, Naira could make out a seated figure. Well, at least she hadn't tipped the chair or anything. Naira walked over, setting her cereal and coffee down atop the dryer while she hopped up to take a seat on the washer. This put her across from a particularly upset-looking, snappered woman whose arms and legs had each been duct-taped and tied to the legs and arms of an old office chair Elaine had bought her from a yard sale. The faded fabric and exposed cushion definitely aided its appearance as a five-piston chair, but if it had survived her boys, it would survive a grumpy businesswoman. More sunlight filtered in through the basement windows, reflecting off specks of dust floating through the air. Naira almost never drew the curtains down here. Well, anywhere in her house, really. The sun was a delightful friend. Bringing her bowl to her lap, she took a bite of cereal. "What is the meaning of this?" Renetta Dolahan demanded. Her button-up shirt was scuffed and dirty, and still sported a patch of Naira's blood from where she'd held her when she'd been forced to carry the woman. She looked a little less imposing without her suit jacket. "Where have you taken me? And why aren't you wearing any pants?" Naira glanced down at the soft, pink, oversized shirt she wore. Even sitting down on the washer like this, the shirt still covered almost half her thigh. Did this woman choose to sleep in a suit? She shrugged. "Haven't had time to put any on. The house has been a little loud this morning." She took another bite of cereal. "Do you realize what you've done?" "It's still kind of sinking in," Naira admitted, taking a sip of pure coffee. Additives only took away from the pleasant, bitter flavor. "This is a crime." "So is murder, I'm pretty sure, which is what I was supposed to do to you. But if you cause too much trouble, I may still need to." Your accent is rough. I'm gonna try it again. "So is murder, I'm pretty sure, which is what I was supposed to do to you. If you cause too much trouble, I may still need to." Renetta gaped as Naira calmly took another bite of cereal. Then she narrowed her eyes. "Your eyes were glowing with a lot of color last night. Now they're not. Is your morning dose or something?" Naira snorted, stirring her cereal while she chewed what was in her mouth. "Something like that. Can I get you anything? I feel like I should offer you some breakfast." The Snepard's eyes were slits. "What's your game? Gonna ransom me? Turn me over to Evo? Leave me to rot in this... Where are we?" She glanced around, taking advantage of the fact Naira had done nothing to restrain her head, but her eyes never wandered far from her captor. "This?" Naira reached down to pat her washing machine. "This is my laundry room." "I gathered that from the ancient piece of junk you're sitting on, love." "This is Gertrude, and she's been a very faithful worker for as long as I've had her. She's seen a lot of dirty laundry, but she always returns it better than she found it." Renetta just stared at her, so Naira took another sip of coffee. "You're unhinged, native," Naira snorted. Then she shook her head. "I don't think so. Just motivated." "By what? Money?" Of course, a member of the 13 would assume that it was a matter of money. "I don't want to talk about me. I want to talk about you. Someone wanted me to kill you, and I almost did. Do you know why I didn't?" That cut through some of Renetta's bravado. Oh, that's a tongue twister. That cut through some of Renetta's bravado, and she shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Because I offered to hire you? Because you want information on Evo? Paddock? You asked about Paddock last night?" "Because you're the first member of the 13 I've met who didn't try to shoot or stab me. Each one I've met so far has tried to kill me at some point in our interactions. But you denied me that luxury, leaving me without a way to spend killing you as self-defense." She took another bite of cereal and shrugged. "It's a thinly veiled excuse," she admitted, "but it helps. Killing you without finding a weapon on you would have crossed a new line for me." The room fell silent for a moment, broken only by the spoon clinking in the bowl. Finally, Renetta spoke. "It's not very comforting." "It's not meant to be comforting. It's simply the truth. Now, shall we talk about you?" Renetta's eyes held nothing that Naira hadn't been regarded with countless times before. Distrust, fear, maybe some disgust. Her captive let out a huff. "Fine. But are you still offering breakfast?" Last night's primary target was Renetta Dolahan, Tolson read from his notes. Sneppered female, age 43, CEO of all three Dolahan battery factories in Cyphus. Net worth is estimated at 32 billion Christum. Won the bid for the position of Minister of the Department of Labor during the 48th election cycle. Employs nearly 200,000 people within Cyphus, and about a quarter of those are Nolfs. As far as personal life, she's a widow of 3 years with a daughter Moira, age 16. Tolson paused his reading there. So she just lost her husband and she kept running for office anyway. Actually reaching the status of one of the 13 is often a lifetime goal for the rich around Cyphus, Leo noted as they continued walking the factory floor. Until recently, it was probably one of the safest jobs you could have in the Bulb. I feel bad for the kid. Lost her dad, now her mom. She's almost an adult, but still, it sucks, man. It took him a second to realize what he'd said. Leo held up a hand to interrupt. This wasn't about him. All the more reason to find our killer, so no more kids have to lose their parents to her. He nodded towards Tolson's notepad. What about the other victims? Tolson still looked embarrassed, but continued anyway. There's a lot, all employed by Dolahan's own security company. Final tally is 34 injured and 4 dead. The 4 who died were all here within the factory, and all of them died from gunshot wounds. Our native hasn't used a gun for her kills in the past. Tolson shrugged. Like you said, only a week since the last one. Maybe she was desperate this time? Many of the injuries and accounts still sound like her. Lightning, fire, magic, and all that cool stuff. Leo shot him a dark look, and he quickly added, stuff that would be a lot cooler if she wasn't murdering people with it. People saw the shooter, right? Guards confirmed it was a Nolf. Tall, skinny, probably feminine build, wearing a mask, started shooting down on the main floor while there was a crowd. Honestly, it's a miracle we don't have more injured. Well, before today, collateral hasn't been our killer's style. Leo whistled as they turned the corner. A large chunk of building was simply gone, and he blinked against the sunlight pouring in through the hole. With an instinctive hiss, he raised his hand to shield his eyes. The floor was covered in bits of glass, rubble, and a whole lot of blue goop. Well, they certainly left a mess this time. Leo's finger twitched. His subconscious wanted to reach for his pocket, but he'd just satisfied the itch an hour ago. Surely he could wait. He dragged his finger through some of the blue stuff to distract himself, then stood and shook it off. Factory floor manager says they hit the primary reaction vats. There's a whole process, something about converting to slow burn reactions so the batteries last longer. He was very eager to explain it, and I tried to pay attention, but honestly most of it just went over my head. But he said that what they took out will leave the factory shut down for a couple weeks at least. He was also very worried that there could be an Electrum battery shortage for a bit, so don't go wrecking your car anytime soon. Tolson elbowed him at this, and Leo snorted. I barely do anything, and my car wrecks itself. You know, there might be some sort of life lesson there. What? Did I break anything I touch? I meant more that life just happens sometimes, and it's not worth wasting time stressing over stuff you can't control. Oh. Tolson grinned. But if Mr. Morning Sunshine wants to open up about his feelings and how he worries about his ability to handle relationships, Dr. Tolson is ready and willing to hear you. Leo rolled his eyes. Time, Tolson. You say that every time. Because we're working a case, idiot. People died last night. We can talk about my feelings later. At Benji's! Yeah. Anything else we should know about what happened here? Tolson grinned. Well, what stands out about the wall? Besides the sunlight pouring through and ruining my vampiric complexion? Yeah, besides that. Taking a moment to look, Leo squinted at the hole in the wall. Just beside it was a large V set in a circle. Both were done in green spray paint, while the gaps were filled in with white. It was several feet tall, and rather obvious now that Leo saw it. He just hadn't wanted his eyes to stray too close to the sun, lest they burn. Did we ask the factory workers about it? Tolson nodded. Yeah, they swear it wasn't there beforehand. Do we recognize it? Tolson shrugged. They're gonna look back... Whoops. My cat is trying to jump into my lap. Distracted. Tolson shrugged. They're going to look into it back in the precinct. None of the guys here recognized it. Leo nodded. Anything else? The spread of attacks is a little weird. Some of the guards say they fought our native up on the top floor. Others say they ran into her in the west stairwell, the one with 2 dead guards. A couple others say they ran into her in the east stairwell, and she pushed a guy over the side there. And then she shot at people on the first floor before chasing after the armored cars. So, actually getting an accurate timeline and order of events is stretching my brain. Reaching up, Leo patted his friend on the shoulder. If anyone can figure it out, it's you. Detective Parsons. It wasn't hearing his name that made his fur bristle. It was the voice that said it. It's my cue to leave, Leo said. He made it 2 steps before Tolson's hand clamped down on his shoulder. Dude, we talked about this. You can't avoid her forever. 'Cause you won't let me, fuzzball. The words settled into a hiss as as Detective McKinley approached. Parsons, Gray, Kenley. Chief wants to know where his expert witness is. Leo groaned, reaching up to rub in an eye. This was the problem with talking to Melissa. There was no opportunity to talk about the past because she was such a workaholic. I haven't seen her since last week. Melissa folded her arms, fixing him with the look someone gave a child who just got caught stealing. Did you scare her off? Or did you tell her one thing and do another? Anhina's cracks. This woman was the most confusing creature Leo had ever met. She swore she didn't want to talk about the 2 of them, but she still found every opportunity to slide the knife in the wound. Leo took a sip of coffee, noting that its bitterness paled compared to Melissa's cold smile. I didn't scare her off. I dropped her off. She provided a report a few days later, and that was it. Well, it's time for you to own that badge. Chief wants her on site and said to dig out the head. Well, it's time for you to own that badge. Chief wants her on site and said to delegate to you to make sure that happens. I'll see what I can do. Melissa snorted, opening her mouth to comment, then deciding against it. Then she shook her head, and for a brief second, she seemed like an actual person again. This whole thing is turning into a huge mess. There's talk of special elections, maybe martial law. Chief's in a lot of hot water for not finding this native yet. The remaining 13 are gearing up to do some dumb and drastic things if we don't find our killer. Then the coldness returned, and she glanced up at him. So I may not need him, but Cyphus needs the old Parsons back. Not the sniveling snob who stays off the range and hides in his car. We need the Parsons who actually cares about people. Unless you shot him too. You made me move on, maybe it's time you did too. The pack of Necrals screamed for his attention, like a hungry infant. His memories of the warm, happy, caring woman he knew were dashed on the ice. Worse, they'd both learned just where to stick the knife, so he returned the favor. At least I've never been demoted for personal behavior. Once a detective, always a detective. I'll find our killer. Tolson looked like he was going to melt from standing too close to the heated exchange. Melissa's eyes bored through Leo. Just find that expert, and don't make me track down this killer alone. They stared at each other for a few moments, until Leo broke eye contact. He hated losing to her, but he wanted this whole exchange to be done. She seemed to share at least that sentiment with him, and stormed off. With a sigh, Leo turned to his friend. Still think that all we need is to just talk things out? Before Tolson could answer, Leo shook his head. Some things in life are time-sensitive. That chance at conversation has expired. Come on, let's go call up our teacher, friend. Yay! 3 chapters in one stream. Let's go! The plot thickens. Everyone's still with me? Yeah. Now that I'm no longer distracted reading, I went to pet my cat, and he decided he wasn't feeling like being petted, so he just bit me. Not hard, but enough to let me know that it's clearly not time for petting. It's coming together! There's so many moving pieces in Alchemanswer. there's a lot. There's a lot going on all at once. We're still in the world building, story building, scene setting, stage building stages. So it's there's a lot of components that have to come out and get developed, but we've met more characters tonight. Like Renetta Dolahan, who has a very familiar last name. And also is, you know, duct taped to a chair in in Naira's basement. But, you know, that's how the best relationships start, right? I promise there's no Stockholm syndrome. But yeah. So we got some people loving Renata, we got some people loving Sergey. Who's everyone's favorite character so far? And you can have multiples if you can't decide. Fair enough. Who is my favorite? Oof. Oof. I will admit I'm a bit of a Renetta fan myself. I also adore Sergey, but I mean the classic trio, Naira, Leo, and Moira are all very near and dear to me. So you know, it's more of like a top 10 because there's a whole bunch of characters that we still haven't met yet that I also love dearly, but we'll get there. Yeah, he's just got, you know, some trauma, like a lot, and also some bad smoking habits that probably aren't doing good things to his lungs or his brain. And, you know, he has like one friend, but but I still love him. We got to meet the police chief tonight, and I realized that I was trying to do a generic deep voice for Leo, and that I was going to have to try to go even deeper for what I envisioned for Bradburn. So hopefully the two voices sounded different. I guess I'll find out when I reviewing the VOD later. But anyway, thank you everyone so much for showing up. Hope you enjoyed it. Looking forward to continuing next week. We are getting close to the end of part 1. So we're making progress. I mean, we've read 130 pages so far. Crazy to believe. We are over, that's like 13% of the way through the book. But yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Hope you had a good time, and hope to see you back next Tuesday. So have a good night, everybody.